Hey everybody, this is Riggs K. Welcome, we are so excited to have you here. We're going to show you today how to optimize your products in our new creator tool, IMVU Studio. And then we're going to answer your questions via our Q&A feature. Please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions and keep your questions on topic and GA friendly. Now that, actually what I want to do is also give you access if you want to download IMVU Studio if you haven't done that yet. Let me do that right now. I'm putting it in the chat window here. All right. Okay, there it is, in case you haven't downloaded IMVU Studio yet. We will be recording this webinar so that creators who were unable to attend the live session now can view it later. And it's also useful even for people who have attended the session, just so you can look at it and stop and start and kind of study it a little bit more. It gives you a little bit more time and flexibility. Okay, so now that we've got all the housekeeping done, I wanted to introduce you to our experts, Jazzcat and Drosselmeyer. Hey, Jazzcat. Jazzcat has been a creator on IMVU for a long time, and he is definitely an expert, and he's going to be demoing for you today. And we also have Drosselmeyer, who is IMVU's digital artist, and he's focused on IMVU Studio. Hi, Drosselmeyer.
Yeah, hi. Hi, everybody. Good to be here. I'm looking forward to this. We'll have a good time.
Awesome. And now Jazzcat is going to give you some vital information on how to make your products look their best and perform well on IMVU Studio, or sorry, on IMVU. And I'm going to have you take it away. You can go ahead and share your screen.
All right, I shall share my screen. Yoink. Oh no, it's going to minimize all the windows again. Right, so
I think you're good.
I hate it when it does that. Right, so today in this session, what we're going to talk about is mainly transparency and ways to think about transparency and how you use it with your products and how that works with Studio. So Studio, this won't work necessarily, some of this won't work necessarily with Classic, because most of the features that we'll talk about are things that we can do with Studio because of the things that the team has put into place for us. So most of the issues that crop up with transparency generally are with jewelry, with this kind of jewelry, where we've got the jewelry itself is a cut out pattern. Well, yeah, it's a cutout pattern and or hair, but we're just going to use jewelry for this because obviously we could go right into the weeds on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Drosselmeyer and myself have been talking about this all week. So it's a big topic. So we're trying to, as best as possible, keep this as not simple, but sticking with. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because we could spend. Yeah, we could turn this into an hour or 2 hour session.
Yes, easily,
easily. Yeah.
Easily. Right. So the first thing that if you're knowledgeable to whatever degree with this kind of stuff, this might seem like rehashing old information, but it'll be useful in terms of understanding how Studio works with transparencies. Because let's get into, right, so transparency can be expensive, and that's just because of the way that it works. So what we have to look at first is, where did I put the, right, so generally speaking, you're going to be creating your transparencies in two ways. You'll be doing things that have gradients of some kind, whether that's a tattoo or filigree or anything else like that, versus a more delineated gradient. And depending on whether you're doing one or the other is going to determine which type of transparency you want to be using in Studio, because it is expensive. So what the transparency is actually doing is, so as we generally know, white, whoops, that's fully opaque. So that's not transparent at all. Black is fully transparent, so we can see through it. And then the gradients in between, each one of these is a degree of transparency. So if you have a delineated opacity map like this, this is generally speaking really easy to render. It's cheap because you've got hard lines between your gradients, or between the degrees of transparency. With a gradient, as you might be able to guess, these are much more expensive, whoops, because it's a gradient. So if this is a, what it is, it's a 256 by 256 pixel image, the same as this, but this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This has 8 degrees of transparency. This has 256, because each pixel, as we go across the gradient, has to be calculated as a specific degree of transparency. So when you're working with your transparencies and your opacities, so something like a tattoo, you might be able to get away with doing something like this, where you've got quite hard gradients on your, well, they're describing your opacity that is then assigned to the tattoo. Whereas doing this, where you have soft gradients around your tattoo, that might make that very expensive. So if we then assign that to, whoops, where has it gone? Jewelry, depending on the type of jewelry that you've got, you might not need soft gradients around the outside of your chain links, for example. So when you bring that into IMVU, into Studio, what you want to be doing is using a map, an opacity map that looks like, where did I put it? Whoops, that's the normal maps. Where's the opacity map gone?
Are you wanting to show them the distinction between blending mode and yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's the opacity map for the chain. So it's quite, there's quite a hard edge around there because of the shape of the object, or the shape of the chain that we're trying to describe. I don't have, where did the softer version go? Oh, I didn't do a softer version. So,
yeah, but you can kind of see the aliasing or the anti-aliasing along the border there.
Yes.
Yeah, so that will be used when you've got it set to the blending mode, right?
Yes, exactly. So when we bring this this opacity map into Studio, and if we're using, we'll actually bring this into Studio in a second, but it makes it's important to make to show this, to get a good understanding of what the opacity is actually doing. So if we use composite, we'll get a nice transition around the edge, because it interprets each of these. Oh, it's going to show me the grid. Hang on a second. Grid lines, get rid of those. So composite can interpret each of these pixels as a degree of transparency. So that gives us our softer edge around our objects. But when we use alpha test, or the alpha test.
The transparency mode alpha test.
What it'll do is, its alpha test differs from composite blend in that it's like an on-off switch. So something's either transparent or it's not. But with alpha test, the transparent bits are defined obviously by the grays of our opacity map, but it's much harsher with the way that it makes something transparent. So in Studio, where is that necklace? There it is, for your Kangs. I'll have to load in. Inventory. Create a helpful pose thing. And then just do a trigger CR3. Right, so that stops it moving. Get rid of the jacket. In use. Whoops. CR3.
Now, are you set to, what's your blend mode at right now?
Right, so that is set to alpha test. So all of these are alpha test. So it's a shame we can't get closer to these things. But it's set to alpha test. So the threshold, we've got that set at the default, and it gives us quite a nice definition of the chain and the jewelry. But we can change the threshold. If we drop it, it might not notice it. Oh, it does actually. We can see a bit more of the gold around the outside. Because
go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because it's dropped. So we've increased the alpha test value. So what it's doing is reading these gray values as part of
the white.
Of the white. So it's interpreting these gray bits as white now. And the black bit obviously is fully transparent.
When alpha test is on, your opacity is going to either be white or black, and you lose all that subtlety in the opacity. And it's gone. And it does make for a faster rendering of the scene. Still expensive, but it is slightly faster.
Yes, especially if you're using layers. So jewelry, hair, and some clothing items are very expensive because, that's one thing we didn't talk about. Right, yes. So why are they expensive? It's not just because of the transparency value. So let's just put this back to 0.5. So it's not specifically the transparency value that's the expensive bit per se. It's what the renderer, as in what we're seeing on screen, that's the expensive bit because of what it has to do in relation to transparency. So when we are, let me get this right. So when we're further away from our object, even though the renderer is calculating all the transparency values for the chain, because it's just a tiny little thing on screen, it's not that expensive from the point of view of system resources to render to screen. But if we get close to it, it won't do it with this particular example because it's not complex enough. But I believe Drosselmeyer has an
I
example to
do.
show.
Yeah, I've got a great example of why this gets expensive.
Right,
And as JazzCat has pointed out, what he's got here is a layered piece of jewelry, and he's using 3 layers. And it's a little hard to see, but I think you've built that out of basically 3 layers.
Yeah.
And you can see it does get the result of having a 3-dimensional object just using planes. And this is not necessarily too expensive for a small, like Jessica mentioned, for a small object such as jewelry. But when you get into larger objects, and I can show you an example of that.
Right, so I stop sharing.
And let me take over here. Share screen. Okay. So can we see that?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to maximize. So this is a bad way to make a 3D object, and I'll explain why. So what's going on here is, like the way JazzCat has built his necklace out of basically planes. These are all, they're stacked 2-dimensional polygons. And when you put the same texture, so in this case, I've got an opacity map that has, let's get it. Yeah, so I have an opacity map that it's 512 by 256. And it just is, so everything that's black will be transparent, everything that's white will be visible. And so that's what you're seeing here. But what's going on is there's a stack of planes. And I can see if I can get to the side here, and you can kind of see, oh, come on.
Yeah, it's seconds per frame now.
Yeah, it's going really slow. But if you get to see, it kind of disappears. But what you're seeing is all those individual planes. Now, this product is particularly bad because, unlike JazzCat's 3 set of stacked planes, this is 800.
Ouch.
And so what's going on here and why it's maybe, I don't know if you can see how poorly the frame rate is.
Yeah.
But the reason why this is so expensive is because for every pixel where this is transparent, it's having to render that and calculate that transparency. And that's just to make something that looks 3-dimensional out of a stack of opacity maps. So this is an example of why you wouldn't want to use this technique for anything large or something that's going to appear large on screen like this, because as you notice, if I move away, and as JazzCat pointed out, the smaller this gets on screen, the performance gets better.
Yeah.
It's still bad.
Yeah.
But it gets better.
Yeah.
But when you get up close and the whole object starts to cover the whole screen, then your frame rate goes way down. And I'm got this set to alpha test.
Oh, wow. I didn't even notice that. Yeah.
Right. So if I set this to, see, and look, it's taking a long time to even update. But if I set this to composite blend,
do you want to do that really?
Well, let's just throw caution to the wind and see what happens. Okay. So now it's still trying to render. Okay. There it's starting to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really chugging. And there's even some kind of weird artifact that's happening now, which I hadn't noticed before. Yeah, I think this is just really taxing on the renderer.
Wow.
So that's why you don't want to build things in that manner.
Yeah, because you have to remember that for those watching, that it's not just what was that, a 512 by 512 or a 25? Oh no, 512 by 256.
512 by 256.
Yeah, so it's not just a 512 by 256 texture. It's actually the entire screen that is then being rendered transparent. Relatively speaking, it's being rendered transparent. So that's why it's taking up so much system resources, because as a small object, it's only a few pixels on screen, but as you zoom in, the closer you get, the more transparency has to be rendered and culled from this, culled from the screen, removed from screen. And, one layer, okay. 2 layers, okay. 10, 800, yeah, that's gonna push even, pretty hardcore systems that.
Right.
Yeah.
Meyer and JazzCat just giving you a note that we're over 20 minutes into the.
We are?
Okay.
Having too
So
much fun.
I think we've got a question here that's related to this. Somebody wants to know, see, Leila Dada asks, and I'll answer this live. Can you tell us in short, the difference between composite, additive, and alpha test? I think since we're on this, we can address that right now. So
yes.
Again, alpha test, oh, you know what? I've got a good example. I'm going to skip ahead. Don't save. Let's go to this. This is a better, okay, where is it? There we go. Let me just change this really quick. Add image. Images, colors, blue. Okay, preview. This will help explain the difference between the two modes. Add an image. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so what I've done here is I've got a solid color for my diffuse.
Oh, there we go. That's a round version of the one I was just, yeah.
Yeah, so this has got a nice gradation on it. And if I pop this on here, what you see is the gradation from the opacity map. And in composite blend, you get this nice smooth transition. If I set this to alpha test, preview, here's what happens.
Yeah, there you go.
So
exactly. Yeah.
What's going on is where these values get closer to white, it starts to just clip. It hits a threshold.
Yeah.
So it's either going to draw white or black, and what's black is transparent. And let me change the background because it's a little hard to see here. Go back to rooms. Okay. So with alpha test on, you either get solid opacity or completely opaque. So either completely opaque or completely transparent. If I adjust the threshold down, you get, so more of the gray is now being treated as opaque, and less of the black is showing up as transparent. If I turn the threshold up, the opposite will happen. So now more of it's biased toward the black, which is more transparent. And so you're getting less of the white. So that's the difference between composite and alpha test. Additive is another rendering mode where it uses the opacity map with its composite gradation. But what's happening is the color for the diffuse channel is getting multiplied, not multiplied, excuse me,
it's a
added,
yeah,
added
so
with the color in the background.
Right.
Double-sided on here. So what that means is this blue color that's in the diffuse is getting added to whatever color is behind this object. So when he gets lighter, it gets a lighter surface, like the avatar's shirt. It's a little hard to see here. It'll push it more toward white. So it's lightening the result of what you see behind with what the object is here. So it's just a flat plane.
So it's working similar to the additive filter in Photoshop or an image
Exactly
editor.
right. Exactly right. Yeah.
Right.
It's I think it's actually probably closer to
maybe one of the blend modes.
Yeah, it's the blend mode.
Like soft light.
Right. Yeah, but there's one, I can't remember what it is. But it's doing that. It's a different calculation of the blend mode. And it'll work even if you remove the turn it off. Yeah, so here it's just there's no transparency. You're just using, so the blue is now added to whatever's in the background. So I answered that one live. Shall we move on? Do you want to move on to what's next? Jessica?
Yeah.
Let me stop sharing and then give the screen back to you.
Well, one of the things, here's another one. Hang on, right, so. Oh, right, is it, can you see the screen?
I can, yeah.
Right, brilliant, whoops. So the other, for jewelry in particular, so this is specific to jewelry. There was a question in there about specular maps. This isn't necessarily in answer to Dara's question in terms of what specular maps are. They're just like regular wire maps. No, they're not. They're essentially just grayscale images that you can use to make objects look shiny. And the degree to which an object is shiny depends on whether it's, so it's a grayscale image again. Where's my, whoops, not that one. So it's a grayscale image again. And with shininess, you can generally get away more with gradients than necessarily with delineations like this. But it's just a grayscale image that, if I remember which way around it is. So white is super shiny, well, relatively speaking.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And black is essentially matte, so there's no shininess effect. So with jewelry, you can use a shininess map. So what's the shininess map for this one? It's not that, that's the opacity map. So this is the shininess map for this object. So that's the chain link shininess map. And the we was Kang, that's the shininess map for the letters. And these are just 8-bit grayscale images in this particular instance. These are PNGs, but it'll understand, depending on what image editor you have, you may or may not be able to export RGB 8-bit PNGs. The app that I've got open at the moment won't do that, so I have to use grayscale images, but Studio understands those without a problem. But you load those into your shininess layer. I remove that, how do you remove? Oh no, that's unassign asset, preview. And it kind of just goes flat. It's not quite as shiny. Let me just remove the normal map for a second. So there we go. Oh, that's interesting. Let me put that normal map back. I didn't notice that before.
Is this on the chain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I never noticed that before. So when you
I
add
think
the normal map,
you get the reflectivity
yeah,
gets turned on, right?
interesting. Right, so let's get rid of the normal map. So without the shininess map, oh, and this, if you want to, well, I won't say that, but one of the things that you don't want to be doing if you are using shininess maps is don't enable self-illuminate, because shininess is basically performing that function in a roundabout fashion. But so without the shininess map, we've got a quite dull looking chain. So if we add the shininess back in, so remember, it's using the grayscale values to determine the degree of shininess in terms of where it should be shiny, where the image should, well, not the image, where the diffuse should appear shiny or not. So we'll add that in, preview. So it makes the chain all shiny. And it's shinier towards the back as we turn around because the default scene has the light. Is it behind the avatar, or is that?
In this particular room, there should be a set of lights surrounding the avatar.
Right.
We just recently updated the room so they have better lighting in them.
Right. So the shininess.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're over the halfway mark.
Are we?
Okay. Yeah.
Back nabbit.
And
See?
I'm trying to answer.
See?
Yeah, and I'm trying to answer some questions at the same time here. So
yeah, it's this topic is, you know, it's a minefield in terms of.
Well, we've gotten off a little bit into shininess here, which
yes,
people are asking about, which is great.
Yes.
So we should address it. But
yes,
maybe we can get back on track with some of the optimization stuff once we got this wrapped up.
yes. So with
Was
the
there more you wanted
shininess
to ask?
maps, yeah, the shininess maps. That's all it is. Just a grayscale image that you can use to make your objects appear shiny. And if you use it in combination with your normal maps, it'll enhance the effect. Although with shininess, you have to be careful because the closer to white your diffuse image is, the shinier your jewelry is going to look, or whatever it is that you're texturing is going to look. And you have to be careful because you can blow it out like this. So this is a quick example. In use, get rid of that. So if you're using shininess and normal maps together, so this has a normal map and a shininess map. As we saw with the necklace, it'll blow the necklace out. So you'll lose all the detail of the normal map, which kind of makes it pointless to have the normal map. But what you can do is err on the side of caution with your diffuse image and make that darker. And you just get rid of the jacket. You can make that darker. And it will have the shininess that you're after, but it won't be blown out. And you'll see, you'll be able to see or discern the normal map and the behavior of the normal map in respect of the scene. So when you're using shininess, keep an eye on that, because shininess and normal maps, well, the whole thing as a unit responds to the scene lighting. So you could have a relatively dark diffuse to compensate for the shininess, but if you then go into a room with a ton of lights, or you stand,
or if somebody comes into, an avatar comes into the room wearing a light product,
yes,
that'll blow out.
Yeah, it'll blow out. So be mindful of that when you are creating your shininess, when you're using shininess, and this applies globally across the board in terms of just all items. So just be aware of that, particularly for jewelry. What was the other thing? Optimizations, image size.
Yeah.
So image size.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say image size and power of 2.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to speak on power of 2? I did some research on that yesterday.
Yes.
And I can confirm that. So in terms of optimization, if you have textures that are non-power of 2, at render time, when that texture is rendered to the scene, it will be scaled to a power of 2 value. So that means that if you've got a texture that's, say, slightly less than power of 2, and so just so we're clear, when we talk about power of 2, we're talking about textures that are visible, the dimensions are divisible by 2. So those would be like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, and 512. And currently, I think our max texture size is 512 by 256. Anything larger than that will be scaled down to 512 by 256 and rendered at that size. The actual file on disk will remain a non-power 2, but that when you actually see that texture on your object, it'll only be that big. So what that means is if you have a texture that's not a power of 2 size, like say it's slightly larger, maybe say 512 wide by 2 or 248, or I was thinking even less, like say 200.
Yes.
What's going to happen is that's going to get scaled down to 128 or 512 by 128. And
does it scale down or up to the nearest?
If I understand it correctly, after speaking to our engineers, it scales to the nearest power of 2. So if it's closer to the higher power of 2, it'll go to that. If it's closer to the lower power of 2, it'll go to that. So if you've got a texture that's slightly larger than power of 2, you're actually using more space on disk than it's actually getting used by the game or by the engine. So the takeaway from this is you want to, whenever possible, keep your textures to those dimensions of either 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, and 512. This is a common thing from the game industry, but it also applies to both the classic renderer and the next renderer. So we wanted to bring that up.
Yes, and it's important. It's important not just because of what Drosselmeyer was just saying, but it's also critical with Studio in relation to normal maps, because what you've got to try and keep your normal maps at size. So they have to conform to the 256 by 512 power of 2 rule, but you also want to try and keep them that way because you don't want these things resizing in, well, you don't want IMVU resizing them, because if it does that, does it default to JPEG or does it keep the format? You know, so if this is
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know internally what format it's stored as. I do know that if you save a PNG and publish the product, that's what you get back when you go to edit it. But as far as what format it's stored and rendered at, I'm not 100% sure.
Right. So this is, with Studio, this is all important because of the normal maps, because you want to try and keep your normal maps as well. You know, you basically, you want to keep them as is in terms of they've got to be 512 by 256, 256 by 256, you know, at size, because you don't want those to be resized, because the colors are specific to a particular purpose or function. Drosselmeyer's got an excellent video on this on the IMVU channel, explaining how normal maps work. But this whole, have you got the link for that?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat right now.
And it's important to understand this power of 2 stuff and texture sizes specifically for normal maps, because if you resize them and you start changing them after the fact, it alters, or it can alter, the colors. And depending on the type of compression that the image might, well, the type of compression that might occur when the image is resized, it might cause problems for the normal map in terms of introducing artifacts. And this is the same for resizing your textures within your image editor. So if you had an original that was 128 by 128, which is what this little one is, and that was your original, and it had the level of detail that you expected your normal map to have, if you resize that up to 256 by 256 or 512 by 512, I mean, we can't use 512 by 512, but, you know, go with the flow, so to speak. But if you resize that, you're introducing colors to each of the versions that are upscaled that weren't in the original image. So the upscaling has to assume the colors that it has to put in place in order to fill, well, it has to add that extra data in. So from a 128 to 256, you are quadrupling. Yes. So that's our original. So it's adding 1, 2, 3 more amounts of data. With a 512 by 512, it's going to be doing that more or less. So that's our original 128 by 128. So if we upscale that, it's adding all of this extra data. And that may not actually correspond to what was actually being created in the original normal map. So you want to be careful with your normal maps when you start playing around with texture sizes. You can do this till the cows come home with your diffuse, and to a lesser degree with your opacity map, depending on what it is that you're doing. So if you've got a tattoo, some filigree, some fine, some fine design work like lace, you might encounter similar sort of issues, but for a different reason when you start resizing those. So make sure that those types of images are always at scale, or the size that they are going to be used, and try and avoid resizing or rescaling them. And so this fits in with what Drosselmeyer was saying about making sure that you are power of 2 to start with, to avoid all of those problems, because that's one of the reasons why, not jewelry, it's one of the reasons why patterns on clothing tends to look blurry,
Mhm.
because it can be caused just because of a slight upscaling, because the renderer is having to assume the missing data.
This kind of is a good segue into the last thing we're going to talk about, which is customizing the size of your maps for the appropriate usage
Oh,
on your
yes.
products.
Yes.
And I have a
Right, I'll stop sharing.
product here to share. Let me share the screen. Okay. Here we are in Studio again. And what I've got is just a series of 3 meshes. They're single planes. And they're sized appropriate or to their aspect ratio and usage. So they've got, each one of these has a 512 by 256 image on it. And this large panel is exactly,
I see. Right.
is exactly twice the size of the medium one, which is exactly twice the size as the third one. So they just keep doubling in size to sort of match well, as I'll show you, they'll match the pixel ratio of the texture. The reason why this is important is you really want to maximize your use of texture size. So if you're putting a very large texture on a very small object, there's more pixels in that image than are going to be shown on screen, depending on how big the object. So in general, the obvious thing is if you have a larger area you have to cover, such as in this large panel over here. Let me just hide the avatar. Hang on a second. Oops. Okay. All right. I've hidden the avatar. So if you have a product that's going to cover, or an object that's going to cover a large portion of the screen, or is going to appear larger on the screen, such as something that be a piece of furniture in a room, a wall of a room, or a surface in a room, then yeah, you want to use a large texture. But then as you get smaller, you can kind of get away with using smaller textures. So in this case in particular, even though these are all the same, they're all 256 by 256, excuse me, they're all 512 by 256. What's happening is there's more pixels per area, so you get a better result. So this is the section on the right is crisper than the section on the left, but it may be you may be overutilizing that texture. So the better thing to do to keep the look consistent would be to use textures that are sized appropriately to their usage. So in this case, if I go to the medium panel and I just switch this out for the 256 texture, and then I'll go to the small panel and use the, where is it? Yep. This one, 128 by 64, preview this. So now what's happened is each one of these are pixel ratio consistent. So on this 512 by 256 size image or panel, I'm getting the same pixel ratio per panel. And this is a very crude example, but it applies in the sense that if you're making a piece of jewelry or something that's going to appear very small on the screen, it's much better to use textures that are sized appropriate to how big they're going to appear on screen. hoping I'm making that clear. The other,
Yes, because it creates a false sense of detail, doesn't it? Because it's squishing down the 512 into a much smaller space, so you get the false impression that you're increasing the detail, the sharpness of the image, but that's actually it's not an optical illusion, but it's just a consequence of the data that has to be put in place or removed in order to rescale the image down to the size to fit on that smaller object.
The other place you can optimize textures is between the maps. And Jaskat, do you have an example of that?
I did, but what I can do is actually use the normal maps that we were just looking at.
Okay.
So if I
need a second.
Yeah.
To compare. What Jaskat's going to show you is not only using textures that are sized appropriately for how big they're going to appear on screen, you can optimize textures between the maps. So in the case of where you have something that has a high amount of detail in the opacity map, you might want to use an opacity map that's larger than the diffuse map. So you might have a case where, well, I can actually show you. Let's do this. Let's do the large. And then Jaskat can show you something more. But I'll give a quick example here. Color. Okay. Okay, so this is just a single color image, and it's 8 by 8 pixels. And then for the opacity map, I could pick a larger texture. Gradients. Nope. Foundation. Go back to my favorite opacity. This one. Yeah. So this is a 256 by 256. So I'm using the higher resolution texture where I want the detail, and just using a lower resolution texture where I don't need to have that detail. Let me stop sharing, and then maybe Jaskat, you could add to this. Does that sound good?
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
Sharing screen.
And I'll try and answer some more questions here.
Right. Yes. So this is the advantage of using Studio, is that it now allows us to change, as Drosselmeyer was just showing us, that it now allows us to be selective with how we use our maps, because we can use, so this bling test, all the textures are 256 by 256, but we don't need to do that. We can use, for something like this, if it's a simple color or a simple something or other, it doesn't really matter. Where's that? There it is. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Where's it gone? Oh, there we go. So we've just got a tiny 8 by 8 pixel image. And we can just assign that, and it'll give us our shininess, and we've still got our normal map and our shininess active, but we haven't lost any detail. We can do the same thing with the shininess map for that. Where's it gone? Let me just quickly save this. So that's the shininess map. That's the original size. So we can make this smaller. Save as. Let's make this 64. And of course, depending on what image editor you've got, it'll give you different options. So we can see how what we're seeing now, this fits into what we've just been talking about in terms of how the image is changed and altered if you rescale and resize. So with some of them, like with the normal maps, you don't want to be doing that because it can do this kind of thing. It corrupts the image relative to the original. But within the context of what we're just talking about now, we can use this because what we want is just an approximation of the shininess of the original, because we don't necessarily need all that much detail. So save that, drop that into the shininess. So that's the shininess as it stands now. Where's the 64 gone? There's the 64. Slight change. And that's the 64. And there isn't really that much difference between the 64 and the 256 by 256. We might even be able to go down to 32 by 32. But the principle that's been spoken about here is that we've got different images or different sized images for the different maps relative to their importance, their function within the product. So for this, because we want that bling diamond texture, we've got a higher resolution normal map because we want that to be the standout feature.
Yeah. And that's typically the case.
Yes.
The normal map is adding detail.
Yes.
And so you usually, if you're going to use a normal map, you want that to be the show piece, right?
Yes. 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 Unless it's cloth or clothing, or I'm thinking of PVC, you know, something that's smooth but shiny. So you'll have a texture on your normal map that may be smaller. Your normal map may be smaller than the shininess map because you want the shininess to be emphasized versus the pattern that's provided by the normal map. But yeah, generally speaking, as Drosselmeyer is saying, you'll want your normal maps to be full size as much as possible, obviously relative to what it is that you are making. But that just shows us how we can change or use different sized images at different stages, depending on what we're doing. So again, with the opacity maps, we don't have one for this, but you could drop in a 256 by 256 opacity map if you wanted a detailed, let's say we had a little cutout. Oh, that's green against green. So let's say we had a cutout within our product. Depending on the size of the opacity map, that'll change the detail of the squiggles that we've got on our product. So depending again on the emphasis or the importance of whatever it is that you're trying to represent, you want to try and keep your images as big as possible or as small as possible.
Just a note that we are at the 1 minute mark until the top of the hour. We can go over a bit. Just wanted to make you aware of it.
Good. Thanks, Riggs. I think we've covered our topics. It'd probably be good just to go ahead and move into some Q&A. I've been trying to answer some questions.
Yes.
You know what? I'm gonna switch. I was starting to answer this one. I think I'll just switch and we can answer it live. It's from Ismail, and they ask, which gives better results? Resizing your map before you draw and add your texture, or resizing after you draw and finish your texture. For example, if I have the UE maps are 512 by 512, and I want to resize them to 256 by 512, for example, do I do the resizing from the start before adding my texture, or do I draw my texture as 512 and when I'm done resize it to 256 by 512? I think, if I understand the question, the best, how I typically work is I like to to work in the finished size. So
Yes.
if the finished size is going to be 512 by 256, because I know that that's the largest texture that IMVU is going to use, then I would use that. The one exception is oftentimes I'll work at 2 times that value. So I'll have my Photoshop or my source file at 1024 by 512, and then save off a scaled down version, but at the same aspect ratio. So the only advantage to that is if we were ever to go to a larger size texture, your source art would already be ready in that resolution. There is some gain in scaling it down, but oftentimes you're just better off just making your texture in its finished size. So if you want a 512 by 256 texture, make your texture that size.
Yes.
The only other thing I can think of that factors into this is if the surface of what you're putting this texture on is, say it's square, it's a 512 by 512 or that a square aspect ratio surface, then yes, that texture will get stretched, but that really couldn't be avoided anyway because of how the textures are saved or rendered in the rendering engine. So the best thing there would be to alter how you're applying textures to that surface, like maybe break it to 2 and use 2 different textures so you don't get that stretch once it's applied to the surface. That's kind of a whole nother topic.
Yes, yeah.
UV mapping and optimizing UV mapping.
I mean, there's only one exception to that sort of general rule, and that would be the normal maps. Don't rescale those. Always work at size for your normal maps, especially if, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're making your normal maps from baked 3D, but if you're doing converted images, always work at finished size, at finished scale, because it causes too many problems that may not be apparent when you actually first start doing it, but you know, it'll introduce artifacts into the image that you don't want to start messing around with, because they can be a real pain to sort out. So that would be the only exception to that.
I don't see any other questions at the moment. I could show an example of that texture.
Yes.
I think we have time for one more show and tell here.
Yeah.
Let me.
Did you already see the one about how to get color working for the head signs? I don't know if that's something that you want.
No, I didn't see that.
Okay.
How to get color working for head signs.
They would love to learn. When they try, it doesn't come out right.
That might be a transparency thing.
Might be a transparency thing.
Would have to see.
Yeah, and it could be. It's going to be dependent on the product. There could be something with how the product is built, like if maybe there's a light in the head product.
Yes.
Or the head sign has a light in it, and it's altering what the texture color looks like.
And you can always email studiobeta@imvu.com. I'll put it in chat if you have specific questions about Studio. So if that answer isn't thorough enough, feel free to reach out to that.
Keon Clark, will there ever be a tutorial on how to make custom heads compatible with IMVU from scratch?
Well, we're answering that live. That's a great question. I think we definitely need to get into the modeling and provide some tutorials on how to model. There's a whole host of tutorials that I think need to be done around modeling, and they need to be specific to both Blender and 3D Studio Max, because those tend to be the primary authoring tools that we encounter with creators. I can say that that is what we're in the works on doing right now. I'm working with JazzCat and Riggs K, and we're going through and we're doing an overhaul of the whole CEC page or pages, and we want to make tutorials that are a lot more concise and deal with specific topics and take you through sort of a journey of how you make things that work in IMVU. So that is coming. That's what we're kind of in the process going through right now. It's a very monumental task, because we want to try and capture everything that there is to know about how to create an IMVU. So yes, there probably will be at some point. I just don't know when.
I would suggest, as an addition, that if you're wanting to make heads, it's probably a good idea to just start making some simple furniture items or simple accessories first.
Yes.
to get to grips with, you know, if it's Blender 3D, it's Blender 3D. If it's 3D Studio Max, it's Max, or any other application, because it's going to be important to know at least the very basics of how to model and manipulate, you know, objects in 3D, because heads are pretty complex things.
Yeah, because you're dealing with this, with skinning, and avatar skeleton. The first things that I started out with were all furniture objects. Those are very simple, very easy to do. You basically just need a basic dummy object or node, and then you make your mesh, you attach it to the mesh, and you export it, and you can bring it into Studio. It's the simplest and easiest thing to start out with to sort of get. And I do a lot of my tests that way. So all these tests that I'm trying out different things, I just use a simple furniture object. It's quick and easy to make these things and to try different things out.
Yeah, Keown just said, they have been they've been meshing for multiple years on in IMVU, so they're familiar with it, I guess.
I was going to do another little show and tell here. Let me see. Okay, panel. Oh, right. Okay, let me share the screen, and this will kind of wrap it, I think. But this is going to be in regards to what happens when textures are displayed.
Are you sharing the screen?
Not yet.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, this is just a simple furniture object. This is just a plane, and I've got a material. I'm going to apply this grid diffuse map now. Let's see. Hello. Why is this not working? Nope. Preview. Okay. So this square is not perfectly square. It's actually in an aspect ratio that matches 256. No, I'm sorry, matches 128 wide by 125 high, which is what my texture is. So the texture that's applied to it, the texture that's applied to it right now is non-power 2. And you would think that this would match perfectly. There would be no stretching based on the width and height, because the aspect ratio is matching the texture completely 100%. So 128 wide by 125 units high. But when you get closer, I don't know if people can really see this through the Zoom video, but I'll try and get in. What you're noticing is, or what I'm noticing when I look at this, is all the vertical lines are consistent, and they have a consistent brightness to them.
Yeah, and thickness.
Horizontal lines, yes, and thickness. Horizontal lines, however, are blurred. That one's blurred. That one's a little sharper. That one's sharp. And then this middle one is very blurred. And I can even move in closer. And so you got consistent vertical, and then a blurred middle one. So the only thing that can be happening here is the texture is getting resized. And I think in this case, since it's 128 by 250, or excuse me, 128 by 250, let me try that again. It's 128 by 125, that it's actually getting it changed to 128 by 128. And the reason why I think this is if I switch to my, okay, so this texture here is the same texture. This is going back to that question that the other person was asking, Ismail was asking about, stretching your textures. So I took my 128 by 125 texture and then I scaled it in Photoshop to be 128 by 128. And what you can see is the result looks very similar.
Oh, right, yeah.
So you got this blur,
Yeah.
but this blur is coming from the image edited in Photoshop and not the rendered image, because the actual texture is power of 2. One last thing to look at here is if I go to a texture that is 128 by 128 that's not scaled. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Did it do it? Okay, yeah, preview. Okay, so here I made an undistorted texture in Photoshop that is the target power of 2 size 128 by 128. And you can see that all the lines are crisp.
Yeah, the same, yeah.
So the takeaway is keep your textures power of 2. You can gain a little bit of optimization when you do this for textures that are slightly larger than a power of 2, because those will be getting shrunk down. And so you kind of got this extra file sizes you don't need. And then the other thing is you'll get an improved look if you stick to powers of 2. So I hope that gives a little bit more explanation. It was good for me to do this exercise because I really got a clear understanding of kind of what the rendering engine is doing.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Looking at
brilliant.
texture. I'm going to stop sharing here. We can go back. Riggs, do you want to put up the Q&A? I think we're just about done. I see a couple other questions here. Let's see. Older meshes. Bastien says, will older meshes be able to be adapted with adding shine or normal map and showing them in Studio Beta? The answer is yes. If you have an old product and you open that for edit in Studio, you can go ahead and add shine. But keep in mind that if you publish over that product, anybody viewing that in the old classic client won't see that shine, because the old classic client uses a totally separate renderer that doesn't support, as is incapable of supporting both normal and shininess maps. Cool. Okay.
We can, if we don't have time to answer the remaining questions live, we can certainly answer them when we post the video recording.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. If we'll take a pass through all the questions and then update them if there's more information I can add to the answers, and that'll be posted, as Rick says. With
Daniel's got a question that's relevant to one of the topics that we were talking about during the week. Will the new render engine fix the old blending bug that caused multiple composite blending images to hide those that were behind it? So what do we call this?
the alpha sort, or the transparency sorting. Yeah. So JazzCat and I went back and forth on this one for this learning session, because that's a huge topic.
Yeah.
There is actually a good post. Riggs, do you have that post? I think this will be our last question. There is, I'll put this in the chat if I can find it. There's one good post on the discussion forums for.
Did you mention that you turned it into is it published Creator Education Center article, or?
I don't think it is yet, unless, did we make it a,
I don't think we've done one on layering. Is that what you asked?
right, the alpha sort, but there is a discussion post on that. Let's see if I can find it. Opacity. Opacity settings. No. Sorting.
And then we'll give ourselves 5 more seconds, and if we can't find it, we'll put it in the
Yeah. If I can't find it, we'll definitely put this in the response here.
Yeah, that's kicking a hornet's nest, is that one?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I can find. Well, wait, let me try one more thing.
Okay. The excitement is building.
And you have won.
Found it.
Oh, great.
Okay, here it comes.
Oh my goodness. So excited.
Live television. We're going to put this into all panelists and attendees. Okay, I just posted in the chat a link to something that talks about the opacity sorting and sort of the ins and it's a brief overview of the ins and outs of that.
Sure.
It is a topic that we are looking at. I've been discussing this with our engineers because it is a big issue, and it does affect things like clothing products that have multiple layers on them, like dresses. And so we're still looking at this, but hopefully this article can provide a little insight into that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Drosselmeyer and JazzCat, for going over all these important topics to help products perform their best and look their best.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. This is good.
Awesome. And thank you everybody for attending. We really appreciate your enthusiasm about IMVU Studio and your hunger to learn about this. It makes our day. And we will post a recording of this session in the next couple of weeks. Keep your eye out for it in the Help Center, help.imvu.com, and in your creator news. And we will be definitely having more of these sessions on different topics. So we hope you'll join those as well. Thank you very much. And we will see you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.